Jets fans, what has been going on the last couple of days? Jamal Adams is not returning to this team. Apparently, this needs to be explained. So that's what I'll do today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday, May 19th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. We have a full show today. OTAs are set to begin this week. We'll talk about what you should look for as the Jets really kick it into gear during their offseason practices. It is a bit of a changing of the guard when it comes to Jets kickers. We'll talk about that as well. But we will begin by talking about Jamal Adams. And I will tell you, you have an incredulous host today based on what's been going on in this fan base the last couple of days. And usually you only have an incredulous host when Woody Johnson speaks. Because when the owner of the Jets speaks to the media, he tends to say ridiculous things. In fact, if you made a Venn diagram of Woody Johnson speaking to the media and Woody Johnson saying ridiculous things, it would be a perfect circle. But the last couple of days, we have had something happen in this fan base that has made me incredulous that has nothing to do with Woody Johnson. So that's a bit of a rare occurrence. It has to do with a former Jets player, and that is Jamal Adams. So there's this Jets podcast, the Jets Lounge. I happen to really like Jets podcasts. I'm very partial to them. So I'm always excited when a Jets podcast lands a great interview. And the Jets Lounge did a great job. They landed Jamal Adams, who, of course, played with the Jets from 2017 through 2020 when he was traded to the Seattle Seahawks. He was an All-Pro 2 out of his 3 seasons with the Jets, then was sent to Seattle for multiple picks, which turned into Garrett Wilson and Elijah Vera Tucker. His exit from the team was very acrimonious. So a player with a lot of interesting history with the Jets, a really good find by the Jets Lounge. And they asked him the right questions, full credit to the folks at the Jets Lounge, because they asked him, they asked him about how he handled his departure. And he said Adams admitted he did not handle his departure well. They also asked a question, would you want to return to the Jets? Again, good questions. Great job by this podcast. Great get of Jamal Adams to interview. Great questions asked. And Adams said, yes, I would like to return. Now, the reaction to this has been bizarre because Jamal Adams says he wants to return to the Jets, and somehow this has been taken to mean that Jamal Adams is likely to return to the Jets. And this is like happening all over the fan base. Now, of course, we're in mid to late May. We don't have a lot to talk about. So things like this, which would never generate attention during the season or even during the early phase of the offseason, tend to take on a life of their own. Because during the season, we have games to analyze. Early stages of the offseason, we're breaking down which free agents the Jets are going to sign, and then we hit the actual free agency. After that, we have the draft to preview, and then the draft happens. But this is that quiet period between the draft and the start of training camp, where there's not a lot to talk about. So we just kind of grasp at straws. Of course, Jamal Adams would want to come back to the Jets. If you have not followed Jamal Adams' career, he has had a spectacular fall from grace. In fact, you have to give the Jets credit for trading him when they did. Now, he kind of forced the issue, but the Jets sold him when his value was at an all-time high, where he was playing at the level of an all-pro. And his career has fallen off dramatically since then, in part due to injuries. But the Jets got multiple premium picks and turned those picks into 2 really good players in Garrett Wilson and Elijah Vera Tucker, 2 players who are far more valuable for this team than Jamal Adams would have been if Jamal Adams had stuck on his career trajectory. Last year, Jamal Adams began his season with the Tennessee Titans, was cut. Then had a stint on the Detroit Lions practice squad. And if you followed Detroit last year, you probably heard about it because Aaron Glenn, Jets head coach, was Detroit's defensive coordinator. It was one of the top stories of the NFL season. Lions suffered injury after injury. Jamal Adams was on their practice squad for a stretch. He got elevated from the practice squad for 2 games and then got cut. This is a guy just trying to stay in the league. He would take an offer from any of the 32 teams. So I understand Jamal Adams would want to stay with the Jets. And again, great job by the Jets Lounge. That podcast did excellent work. It was a really captivating interview Really great get by Jamal Adams. They asked the right questions. Those are the questions I would ask. But the reaction to Jamal Adams saying, I want to come back to the Jets, that doesn't mean the Jets are going to be interested in signing him, because I don't know what use the Jets would have for a 29-year-old broken down safety who's also had a history of being a high maintenance guy through the majority of his career. The Jets are trying to turn the page with Aaron Glenn, and they're trying to get away from that. The Jets had a lot of big personalities here the last couple of years, and obviously it did not work out well. Of course, sometimes you can win with big personalities, but Glenn's kind of looking to get a fresh start. Now, the one thing I would say is, yes, I know somebody's going to raise the point. Glenn's team did sign Jamal Adams to the practice squad last year. So does that show there might be some degree of interest? Well, I'd counter that Detroit cut him before the season was over. So that shows you what they think of Adams. But there's a difference when you're suffering injuries left and right, and you're just like trying to get bodies in, and you're trying to win a Super Bowl as Detroit was last year. You're just trying to keep your defense afloat, with tying together with whatever you can. That's different from the situation the Jets are in, where the Jets are very much trying to start it. I hate to use the phrase because it's become a cliche around the Jets, but building a culture, building a culture around guys who are going to work hard, behind guys who are going to want to be here, behind, guys who are going to be good locker room guys. Can Jamal Adams still play? I'm not convinced he can. I mean, it's been a long time since he's been a productive player. Can Jamal Adams, help the rebuilding process? I mean, he's been a high maintenance player through much of his career. He's like the exact antithesis of the type of player the Jets would want in this situation. Just because a player is interested in coming to the Jets doesn't mean the Jets are going to be interested in a player. For Jamal Adams' standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to want to come to the Jets. From the Jets standpoint, it makes zero sense to want Jamal Adams back. He's not going to be able to help this team. I mean, he's been awful the last couple of years. Again, he was cut last year by Tennessee, signed with Detroit's practice squad, and got cut there. This is the all-pro of his second and third seasons is now long gone. That player left the building, and the Jets got great draft picks in return, which they turned into two really good starters in Garrett Wilson and Elijah Vera Tucker. I think that it's obviously a very difficult, complicated history between Jamal Adams and the Jets, and between Jamal Adams and Jets fans because of how acrimonious his departure was from this team. I think it makes blood boil whenever they hear the name in the Jets fan base. He's one of the most disliked players in recent memory for the Jets because he burned every bridge on his way out of town. And of course, the irony is that if you remember how he handled it, he handled it horribly. And if he had just everybody would have taken his side if he had just said one thing instead of like doing all this stuff, all the woe is me stuff that he did. If he had just said that, I don't want to be here because of Adam Gase, like 95% of the fan base would have been on his side during that whole thing. So he misplayed his hand of like he wanted the Jets fan base to like him. But he was here a long time ago. Yeah, I mean, he was here years and years ago. He was traded in 2020. 5 years ago that trade happened, and it's worked out great for the Jets. I mean, looking back, can you imagine how worse off the Jets would be if they hadn't made that trade? If we had Jamal Adams here, who probably would have gotten a big contract instead of Garrett Wilson and Elijah Vera Tucker. So thank goodness the Jets made that trade. We don't need to go back down that road again. We don't need to go back down memory lane. Jamal Adams is gone. Jamal Adams should be gone. There's no reason to bring him back. There's no reason to expect the Jets would bring him back. Despite like the very tenuous Aaron Glenn ties, because I know he was on Glenn's defense last year, there's very little reason to think Jamal Adams will be back with this team ever again. Now, during the Locked On Jets podcast, two more players who probably won't be back with the Jets ever again: Greg Zuerlein and Thomas Morstead. Two guys who, aside from Zuerlein's shaky 2024, two guys who were largely productive during brief stints with the team. But it shows that there is a changing of the guard generation-wise on special teams and across the roster. And we'll dive into that deeper as we continue here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Skylight Calendar. Say goodbye to sticky notes, scribbled plans on the fridge, and overlapping calendar invites. The Skylight Calendar is here to bring clarity to the chaos and help families stay organized without the stress. This sleek digital display syncs with your existing calendars, Google, Apple, Outlook, and more, making it simple to track appointments, practices, dinners, and reminders all in one easy-to-see place. What would it mean to eliminate the I don't know excuse from your family's routine? Could assigning everyone their own color finally solve the who does what confusion in your house? How often do plans get missed because they're buried on the digital calendar or not written down at all? I can tell you Jamal Adams' return to the Jets will never be on the Skylight calendar, but it can really help you organize things for your family. And right now, Skylight is offering our listeners $30 off their 15-inch calendars by going to skylightcal.com/NFL. Go to skylightcal.com/NFL for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That's skylightcal.com/NFL. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. A big shout out to you, everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Over the last couple of days, the Jets have made some pretty major special teams announcements. There were two cuts that were made. Thomas Morstead and Greg Zuerlein, the kicking tandem. Zuerlein was the Jets' place kicker for the last 3 years. Morstead has had two different stints with the team. Two guys who are really stand-up guys. Zuerlein had a really rough 2024. Only made 60% of his kicks, 9 of 15. Had some big misses and close losses, and then spent half the season on injured reserve. A very difficult season, which happens to kickers sometimes. And Morstead, I think, also had a bit of a down year in 2024. Well, I'll tell you, Thomas Morstead's a class act. You've heard him on this podcast multiple times. Really great guy. I'll tell you, I wish both of these guys nothing but the best if they want to continue their career, or if they're just decided it's time to hang it up. Morstead, 39 years old, Zuerlein, 37. So either of them, neither of them could be blamed if they decided this was it for them. But I wish both of them the best going forward. I think this shows that this is I think a microcosm of where the Jets are right now. Last couple of years, the Jets have opted for really old players across the roster. And, it began with Aaron Rodgers at the quarterback position, who was the oldest quarterback or second oldest quarterback in the league the last couple of years. They started 2023 with Dwayne Brown, who was the oldest tackle in the league at that point. Last year, they went with the pair of 33-year-old tackles, one of whom worked out really well in Morgan Moses, one of whom didn't work out so well in Tyron Smith. You had 30-year-old Mike Williams. You had Hassan Reddick as he was turning 30. There was a lot, Jets were really focused. Jets were really bringing in veterans. The roster was not the oldest in the league, but that was mainly because the Jets had a lot of young contributors who predated the addition of Rodgers. He still had that 2022 rookie, the draft class of 2022, and some 2021ers who were still effective. But this is a new regime, and it shows we're turning the page. It shows that it feels like there's going to be a youth movement in town with Aaron Glenn. And I think part of this is Glenn kind of wants to bring in his own guys across positions. I'm not particularly worried about the Jets being able to find a kicker. I mean, finding a kicker is not that hard to do. I mean, the Jets are the only team in the league that's made finding a kicker hard. Last year, Anders Carlson came in and did a very solid job in place of Zuerlein. And here's the thing you have to remember. When the Jets brought Zuerlein in, his stock was at a low point. He was coming off a rough season. Jets brought him in. He had two very good seasons. In fact, in 2023, where he made 92% of his kicks. And it shows you just how random performance is with kickers. You can be great one year and bad the next year. All these people who are saying they're happy Zuerlein's gone. I bet these were the same people that were praising the Jets for giving him a 2-year contract extension after his great 2023 season. With kickers, it comes and goes. There's no real rhyme or reason to it. But the one thing about the kicker role is it's one of the few spots in the NFL where supply is greater than demand. There are, at any given point in time, there are more than 32 quality kickers in the league. And you see this every year. Some team has an injury at kicker, or some team's kicker gets off to a really bad start, so they cut him. They bring someone in off the street, and the guy ends up doing a decent job. The Jets kicker battle will, at this point, be between Anders Carlson and Caden Davis. Caden Davis is an undrafted rookie signing out of Mississippi. I would probably lean towards Carlson ending up with the job because he's more of a proven commodity. Davis was kind of shaky, and Davis was not consistent in college. So I think Carlson, who did a solid job in place of Zuerlein last year, probably has a leg up in the kicker role. And as far as Thomas Morstead goes, look, I can't be objective about Thomas Morstead because he's been on the podcast multiple times. And if you've listened to those episodes with Thomas Morstead, really insightful, willing to answer any question. I mean, he really got you into the weeds. If you're interested in punting, I don't know that you could go into much greater detail than Thomas Morstead did in his appearances on this podcast. So I have nothing but fond feelings for Thomas Morstead. The Jets originally brought him in 2021 after Braden Mann got injured in that week 1 game against the Carolina Panthers. They then cut him when Mann was ready to return, and then brought him back in 2023, which I think was probably the right move. I think letting him go in retrospect in 2021 to keep Mann instead was probably the wrong move. But the Jets, I think, looking to get a little bit younger. I think Aaron Glenn kind of looking to turn the page, looking to establish his stamp on the roster. And these are not roles I'm overly worried about finding people for. Again, punters and other spots. There are more than 32 qualified punters at any given point in time. The Jets will be able to find a punter somewhere. I'm not even sure whether the eventual punter this team has is on the roster right now. Sometimes what happens is you get down to the end of training camp and some team has 2 good guys and one of them gets cut and somebody becomes available. So for the Jets, we'll see 2 new kickers. And it's significant also because the punter on most teams is the holder. That's the way it was with the Jets, where Morstead was the holder for Zuerlein. So less of a, I think actually some teams may have pause cutting their punter if they were keeping their kicker, because if you've listened to Morstead's shows when he's been on the podcast, he's talked about the importance of making sure the kicker has the ball where he wants it. He's talked about how kickers have different styles and different demands of their holder. So if Zuerlein was still around, that might be an argument for keeping Morstead, somebody he's got experience with as a kicker. I mean, it sounds silly, but I think it's accurate. People will tell you that the kicking game is very intricate. So Jets, of course, decide to turn the page on both of these guys. And again, all I can say is that I wish both of them well. And I think the Jets should have a fairly easy time. Famous last words, of course, because the Jets have a way of complicating things like this. But a new regime in place gives me hope that the Jets should not have a very difficult time finding quality out of their kicker and their punter. And I think the Jets are looking to get a little bit younger at both spots. And here on the Locked On Jets podcast, the focus will stay on young Jets because OTAs are opening up this week. That is the most important part of the offseason program. And to the extent it's important, I think it's really important for young players. We'll talk about some of the key players to keep an eye on and why it's so important for them as we continue here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Monday. OTAs begin this week, and that is like the biggest part of the offseason program. The offseason program has 3 stages to it. The beginning is really just guys doing conditioning drills, and then it ramps up. And now we've reached OTAs, which are the closest thing to actual practices, which take place during the offseason. Now, OTAs are not mandatory; they're purely voluntary. A team cannot force a player to go. The team cannot fine players if they don't go. Except for there is one 3-day mini camp, which is mandatory, which players can be fined for not attending. And of course, if you remember last year, Hassan Reddick skipping that mini camp was kind of the first real sign that we had trouble on the horizon. But this year, the Jets have had very high attendance during the voluntary stages of their offseason program. Feels like a lot of guys looking to make a good impression on the new coach. How important are these offseason practices? Well, I hate to burst your bubble, but I think in most cases they're not all that important. And this is the example I'd use. I'll go back to what I mentioned in the first segment. We're in the really quiet point of the year where we're just starved for news. So if we get even a little morsel of news, we tend to overanalyze it to a ridiculous degree. Okay, we've got practices happening this week. Now, if you heard a guy during the regular season, let's say it's October, you heard that a Jets player had 2 really good practices back to back. What would you think about it? I don't think it would really change your opinion on that player. But during OTAs, if a guy has back to back good practices, it's like the biggest thing in the world because again, we don't have much else to talk about. Here's the way I view it. There are certain players you're looking to see make a leap this year. And a lot of them are second-year guys. So your Malachi Corleys, maybe your Quantez Stiggers, got guys like that. Or, even some third-year guys who haven't really, guys from the draft class of 2023 who haven't really made that much of an impact. Jarek Bernard-Converse, Zach Kuntz, somebody like that. I like to think about a player's progression is kind of like a long story, kind of like a novel. And I like to start from the back. The end of the story is the player successful. Player goes on to have a successful 2025 season. So if that's the end result, I ask myself, what would the first chapter be? And that's what we're looking for here. We're looking for the first chapter of success. And the first chapter would be a player having a successful OTA period. It doesn't mean that much. If all you do is have a successful OTA period, it doesn't really mean anything. But it could be the first sign that maybe you're starting to make a move as a player. And we'll hear from the coaching staff. There will be points where the coaching staff will speak to the media. It's always interesting to hear what the coaching staff has to say. There are some coaching staffs that are very attuned to their roster. And if you hear Aaron Glenn mention a few specific players who have made big strides, maybe guys that weren't important parts of the Jets in past years, that might be worth keeping an eye on. Doesn't mean that they're on their way to success. It would just be the first chapter. A good book with only a good first chapter is not a good book. A book with only a good first chapter is not a good book. But a good first chapter could be an indication that we're in for a good story. And that's kind of what we're looking for. I don't think Malachi Corley's roster spot is guaranteed right now. The Jets may not have a lot of quality at the receiver position, but there are a lot of guys this coaching staff likes, maybe wrongly, but there are a lot of guys the coaching staff likes. We know Garrett Wilson's going to be on the team, but then you have veterans. You have a number of veterans. You have Alan Lazard. You have Josh Reynolds. You have Tyler Johnson. You have Arian Smith, who's not a veteran, who you just drafted, who's obviously going to be on the team. Then it becomes very difficult to see Malachi Corley's guaranteed roster spot in this numbers game. Is Herb Charles going to be on the team for special teams ability? Well, that's another wide receiver right there. Xavier Gipson, it may be down to Gipson versus Corley for the final roster spot. But more significantly, it's not just about making the roster for Malachi Corley. It's also about showing he can be a productive player in this league. Because, it's one thing if Malachi Corley is the number 6 or number 7 receiver and buried on the bench and doesn't do anything. Jets, even though it was a different regime, invested a lot in him. They traded up to get him at the top of the 3rd round. And he did virtually nothing to justify that faith last year. It was a lost rookie season for Malachi Corley. I don't think it was a total shock. I mean, he was a guy who really struggled with route running. And on top of a rookie who struggles with route running, who usually doesn't make an impact anyway, he was paired with the quarterback in the league who is the most demanding of his route runners in Aaron Rodgers. So it was always a very awkward fit between Corley and Rodgers. But Corley's got to make a move. This is to be a project in this league is one thing, but after a year, you have to show that your investment in you is still a worthwhile endeavor. And that means showing improvement. That means showing progress as a player. It means showing that that you are heading in the right direction. Last year, Corley could get away with what he did. And part of it was the GM who drafted him was still here. Corley is off scholarship now. Joe Douglas was the guy that wanted him. Robert Saleh was the other guy who wanted him. They're both gone. He did nothing in year 1. So this is to the extent that these OTAs matter for somebody, I think you can make a case that they matter for Corley. And then other guys you're looking to make a leap this year. Does it matter for Quinnen Williams? Not really. Does it matter for Sauce Gardner? Not really. Does it matter for Garrett Wilson? Not really. Guys who are established in this league, I guess it's nice to see them at the offseason workout. I mean, I guess you can make a case that shows that they've got a level of commitment, but these guys know how to get ready for the season. The guys I'm looking for are the less heralded guys, the guys who we're looking to step up, the guys who actually may take advantage, the guys who actually might benefit from these OTAs, because these are the guys that really need reps. And of course, well, I could go on a rant about how the NFL should really put together a developmental league so these guys could get the reps during games. But until the league does that, the reps that they're going to get are mostly going to be through practice. And that's where these OTAs could actually matter. And these are the players these OTAs could matter for. So that will be worth watching in the weeks ahead. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Have a great Monday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.